Good afternoon. Welcome back to the 2021 Schmiechen Lecture Series at Eden Seminary. The topic, We Can Do All Things, Practicing Anti-Ableism in Christian Worship. I'm Reverend Dr. Dietra Wise-Baker, your Assistant Professor of Contextual Education and Community Engagement. Thank you. This afternoon, we invite a panel of practitioners working at the intersections of anti-ableism and Christian community to share about their context of ministry and their practices that guide their work as anti-ableists. When the panel's finished, and just in terms of the flow, when the panel's finished, we're going to have a break. We're going to give you another break, and then we're going to invite Dr. Spurrier and Reverend Stevenson back up to offer some final reflections and for us to digest some of today. We didn't get a chance to do a lot of that this morning, so they're going to interact with you and the panel and help us to digest this as we actually turn our face to what are we going to do? Like, we can't just have this conversation rooted as a particular kind of community and not act and think about what's next. And so we'll turn our face as a community towards practice and action. So I'm going to welcome and introduce our panelists at this time. Our first panelist is Becca Maron Anderson. She is a disabled writer, theologian, and activist, and she's been writing and speaking about disability ministry and theology since 2016 and has presented at the National Church Leadership Institute, the Southern New England Conference of the UCC, Super Saturday, the UCC Eastern Regional Youth Event, and the UCC General Synod. She earned her Master of Divinity degree from Union Theological Seminary and currently serves as the co-chair for the United Church of Christ Disabilities Ministry Board of Directors. She says, when not trapped in her inescapable desk, she can usually be found playing Dungeons and Dragons, and she regularly blogs at beccamaron.blogspot.com. Go ahead and follow that. I'm going to say it again. I got you, Becca. beccamaron.blogspot.com. The Reverend Harold Russell Ewell II is an ordained deacon in the Missouri Conference and currently serves as the pastor of Terrace Lake United Methodist Church in Kansas City, Missouri. Additionally, he is the chair emeritus of the United Methodist Association of Ministers with Disabilities and a board member of Missouri Faith Voices. Russell graduated from Normandy Senior High School here in St. Louis and earned a BS in sociology from Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville. And in 2009, he distinguished himself by becoming the first blind student to graduate from Eden Theological Seminary in its 168-year history. Good for Russell. I'm not sure if it's good for us, but good for Russell. He also has the distinction of being the first blind person to be ordained in the Missouri Conference of the United Methodist Church. He gives talks across the country on disability advocacy, awareness, and the disability rights movements and the intersections of religion and disability and the intersectionality of disability and Black theology. Reverend Ewell is the proud husband of the Reverend Adrian Denson Ewell. Next, we have the Reverend Sidney Baum, who was ordained in 1992 in the UCC. In her ministry, she has served local churches in settled and interim pastorates and faith-based human service advocacy organizations in administration. Currently, she is the vice president of spiritual care of the Emmaus Homes Incorporated, where she has served since 2013. Emmaus supports adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities in 5 counties in Missouri. Reverend Baum holds a Bachelor of Science in Social Work degree from the University of Evansville, a Master of Social Work from Washington University, and a Master of Divinity degree from Eden Theological Seminary. She has been active on boards of directors and advisory councils for numerous local, state, and national organizations. Reverend Baum is the proud mother of 2 terrific young adults, Andrew and Abigail Riggs. Welcome. Can you all give a round of applause and welcome to our panelists who are online, by the way, with us as we continue in this high flex environment. So I asked the panelists each to just give us a brief introduction to themselves about their life and their context and ministry and how it intersects with practicing anti-ableism. So I'm going to ask Becca to open up and speak first.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Wise-Baker. So yeah, my intersection with anti-ableism work is the work that I am practicing all the time throughout my life. I am disabled. I've been legally blind since I was about 2 years old. And so even before I knew what ableism was, I was resisting it. I was encountering it in the world and realizing, no, that's not how I should be treated. That's not the way in which society should work. And so trying to push back against that. And so a significant part of my call to ministry was realizing that that work needed to be done in the church, that a significant amount of the ableism that I encountered was within church spaces. So my ministry these days is a lot of writing and public speaking, largely about disability ministry and theology. My most official role is as the co-chair of the UCC Disabilities Ministries Board of Directors. And so in that role, we provide resources to churches and other settings of the UCC to help them become more accessible, to help them realize the ways that their architecture and their practices are perpetuating ableism, and to counter that by creating accessibility and inclusion. And then beyond that, in my own work, I write and speak and go visit various communities to talk to them about accessibility and disability theology. And something that I want to lift up is that one of the most important ways to me that I do that is I make sure that I am speaking to disability communities. Frequently, when disability ministry work is being done, it is being done to educate non-disabled people, and that's very important work. I don't want to minimize that, but it can be really disconcerting as a disabled person to be listening to a lecture about disability theology or disability ministry and find that you are not even being addressed. And so I try to make sure that in whatever I'm doing, I am speaking to and dialoguing with other disabled folks. So to other disabled folks who are in person or virtual, hello. I do not literally see you, but I metaphorically see you. And I hope that what my fellow panelists and I have to say here today will be useful to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Russell, Reverend Russell, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself next.
Surely. And thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this very important conversation, and this conversation that affects my life in some very granular ways. As a person growing up with a disability in pre-ADA, from the beginning, I began my ableism, anti-ableist dialogue and work when my parents were told that as a person who was blind, that I would not do well in an integrated classroom setting. My parents were told that never to look forward to a day when I would graduate from high school with a diploma, only with a certificate of completion, if that. And so I found out later on, my parents did enter me into public school. I found out later on that my 5th grade teacher wrote down that I was being uncompliant because I was unable to read the board and unable to read the books. So she thought I was just acting out. So they put me in what they call behavior disabled classes, BD classes. I looked around and said, this is not where I'm supposed to be. This is not the ways people should be treated. And I asked actually the principal, not even knowing, my parents didn't even know, but I asked the principal, how do I get out of these classes? And they said, well, the only way you can get out is to test. And so, but because of the curriculum that I was entered into, there was no way that I would have the knowledge to be able to get out. And so I said, give me the test, and I tested out and was placed into college prep classes. And so again, working on these these ableist thoughts has been my life. Went on and began working, graduated from college. I'm giving you the Reader's Digest version. Graduated from college, went to work, had some difficulties with some jobs, and we had to part ways because I did not know my rights as a person with a disability. Did not know about reasonable accommodations. And so I found myself parting with a position. And so being someone who was really driven, I began to write everyone. I wrote all the congressmen, I wrote legislators to try and find what can I do? And a lot just wrote back and they told me about different programs that were available, but that wasn't what I was interested in. I wanted a job. And so I received a letter back from Carol Moseley Braun, senator at the time, and William H. Clinton, who was the president at the time. And he said, if you find a job that you are able to that it fits your skill levels, then let me know, and I will write a letter of introduction. A strong advocate and a mentor of mine let me know that there was a way for me to be able to enter into work as a Centers for Independent Living. And so I did that, and because of the advocacy that self-advocacy and systems advocacy that I did at that moment, I became known as the advocate for the state of Illinois, because that's where I was at the time. And so these are my entrance into this work. And I will reserve my other comments for the other questions.
Thank you so much, Reverend Ewell, for sharing a little bit about your context and history. We're going to invite Reverend Sydney to share a little bit about her context.
Excuse me, I had to unmute myself. I realized, just got a notice that I was muted. Good afternoon, everybody. I entered this very aware of my own social location. I am not currently a person with a disability. However, I am very aware that any of us currently without disabilities can enter the disability community very quickly through accident, through illness, et cetera. And so I feel today that I'm as much learner as I am contributing to the conversation. I work for Emmaus Homes, which is an organization about 128 years old, I think, this year. We are historically related to the United Church of Christ, and we serve and support approximately 200 adults living with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we provide them with generally 24/7 support services so that they may live as independently as possible. I am the Vice President of Spiritual Care, which means that I lead a worship service weekly, generally composed of Emmaus clients and support staff. Right now, we're online. We've been online really since March of last year. COVID hit our organization very difficultly, very hard. And we lost some of our clients to COVID, unfortunately. So right now we're still online. I am aware in leading our worship services that our folks come primarily the intellectual and/or developmental disability is the piece that brings somebody to Emmaus and to our services. But our folks also come, several have diagnoses of mental illness. Several have physical impairments that require the use of a wheelchair, use of a walker, require accommodations in physical settings. Several may have a hearing or a visual impairment. Many of them are nonverbal, and there's a real range actually of verbal abilities. And I want to say that nonverbal does not mean not communicative. That person often communicates through vocalization, through gestures, as I am gesturing right now, through body language, etc. But a range of verbal capacity from nonverbal to to some speech and language to fully verbal. So I work with folks presenting a wide amount of difference, and I'm really captivated by that conversation about communities of difference, because that's the worshiping community that I'm privileged to serve every week.
Thank you so much, Reverend Sydney. I want to turn our conversation sort of back to Dr. Spurrier's lecture and Reverend Kyle's comments around theological imagination. I'm processing too. I'm learning too. And one of the things that I said to Reverend Kyle is that this conversation is bringing me into the intersections of other oppressions, other pieces that I think get lost when we are not in dialogue with each other. And so I wanted to offer you all a space to talk with us more about the urgent issues of theological imagination in your context related to practicing anti-ableism in your social location. What do you perceive as the barriers in the life of the church? We heard a little bit about that this morning. And how do we begin to overcome them? Like, how do we take next steps in our theological imagination to move forward? So I'm gonna switch the order, and I'm gonna invite Reverend Ewell to respond first.
Thank you. So in looking at this question, I was reminded that there are two entities that I believe that we need to make sure that we address, whose job it is to work through and to help the theological imagination for seminarians, for pastors, for preachers, for theologians who are coming through. The first is judicatories of denominations, and the second is seminaries and schools of religion and theology. And I give kudos again to Eden for the work that you're doing now. There are embedded theologies that must be addressed in order to be able to empower others to be able to have this imagination, to think beyond what we are accustomed to. There are having to deal with moral codes, and this ideal, particularly in judicatories, about what it means to be a priest, what it means to be a pastor. There are still conversations to this day, because I'm an advocate. People come to me and they tell me these things. There are still conversations to this day about should a person with a disability be able to pastor a church, because the Bible says that there are particular things that they should not have. They should not have, be blind or be deaf. Someone told me that they had a situation with a judicatory, and they told them that, well, deaf people could never be Christians. And they said, why? And they said, because the Bible says, he that have an ear, let him hear the word of God. And because they cannot hear, then they cannot be Christians. We are still dealing with this embedded theologies to this day. And so we have to address those things. And lastly, again, there is a wonderful book, and it's dated now, but it's called Graduate Theological Education and Disability. I offer that to you all, and it talks about the struggles that people have had when they were coming through higher institutions of learning. And forgive me for my conversation, because much of my responses would have been, and this is kudos to her, would have been what Professor Spurrier talked about earlier. So I'm trying to stay away from those. But those are some things that I would like to lift up to you at this moment.
Thank you so much. Becca, do you want to add on and layer this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to kind of continue what Reverend Russell was talking about embedded theologies. I think our embedded theologies come not just from our sacred texts and from traditions that we explicitly understand as theological, but from the world around us. And we don't always realize that, and that can be really dangerous. So one thing that I think has made its way into our embedded theologies is capitalism. One of the things that I experienced a lot growing up was the ways in which what does it mean to be doing work? What does it mean to be working for God, doing the work of ministry? And so much of that is bound up in capitalism and in the Protestant work ethic. So specifically, the way that impacted me was that there was a kind of unspoken understanding that in order to be a good Christian, a good person involved in Christian community, you needed to be as busy in the work of the church as possible. You needed to be volunteering on all the committees and all the boards and going to all the events and making food for all of the events. And so there were kind of two sides to this. One side was in terms of how this relates to people with disabilities. One side was okay, if a disabled person enters your community, it is now on the congregation to do the work of making sure that this person is taken care of. And I say taken care of, not included or made accessible, because that's really how it manifested. A lot of my experiences in church spaces were people making sure that they were guiding me places and, offering to read bulletins to me, but not asking me how my day was, not trying to find out more about me. They were busy doing the work of trying to make sure that disabled people were being cared for without taking the time to be present and be with people. The other side of this is that frequently being disabled makes it harder to do the things that are traditionally considered work. Reverend Russell was talking about his struggles finding a paid job, and that's an experience that many disabled people still face. And it can frequently happen in churches as well, that there are some kinds of work done in churches that are harder for disabled people to do. And so therefore, if being a good Christian is defined by what work you do for the church, and you do not appear to do that work, are you really a Christian? And I think what this comes down to is a question of theological anthropology. We have let capitalism and the Protestant work ethic define what it means to be human and what it means to be a good human, and that is to be a person who is always working. When in my study of scripture, what I have found is the Bible and a lot of our theological traditions tell us that being a good human is about being in relationship and is about love. And so one of the issues of theological imagination that I like to take on is the question of interdependence. And I could say more about that, but I will leave it there for now and see what Cindy has to offer.
Thank you so much, Becca. Very helpful. Come on, Sydney, she already invited you. You're muted.
I'm muted again. Okay, now I'm mute. I'm in, right? Thank you, Becca, for inviting me. I appreciate that. Theological issues. Who are we as the body of Christ? How do we define that? And I work with folks that often I think are excluded in what people think of when they think of the body of Christ. And what does it mean? What do we mean when we say we are all made in the image of God? How big is that image? Who is that image? I want to share a story, and I'm afraid it's a sad story. It's a bad story. So, but it is the reality. Unfortunately, one of the things I do often for Emmaus is to lead funerals, memorial services. I say unfortunate because that means somebody's passed away. I will say, honestly, they're some of the most profound and beautiful experiences I have to lead it in the Emmaus community. But often folks may have their own church communities, home communities, in which their family wants their funeral to occur. And so if that's nearby, if that's geographically close, then we accompany the clients who usually were housemates of that person, or those who were friends. And I accompany the clients and the staff to the funeral. This was a funeral, I'm not going to say where it was, but it was in the St. Charles geographic area. And it was a very traditional Roman Catholic church. I'm not saying that to pick on the Roman Catholic Church, because I honestly think that this could have occurred just about anywhere. But this was the context, being very traditional in their liturgical practice. I think actually this congregation on occasion had Latin Mass. And this was the man's home church. His mother still worshiped there. She wanted his funeral to be in this congregation. And so I went with his two housemates and their support staff. Both of the men who were the housemates used wheelchairs. And so as we came into the sanctuary, there was no place for the wheelchairs except in the very back where they could not see, or as we're looking up towards the chancel. At the very left of the chancel, there was a very small space that barely accommodated the men in their two chairs. But that's where they sat. There was not space for their support staff to either even stand with them or sit with them. And so their support staff sat in the pews. So first issue, really no accessible quality space for somebody in a wheelchair to participate in that service. Then some of our clients, as I said, vocalize. And so during the priest prayer, one of the men began to vocalize. That was his way really of connecting with what was going on in worship. That happens often in worship services that I lead at Emmaus. And often I engage with the person vocalizing. This man had a bear that he brought everywhere. It was a stuffed bear. It was a support animal for him. And he often talks about his bear. And I'll usually engage in that and say, we're really glad to have you and Bear here with us. But his vocalizing that day totally rattled the priest, absolutely threw the priest off his schedule, those of us who lead worship, we kind of have a thing, right? A rhythm, and it threw him off his rhythm. He started stumbling on his words, clearly was not accustomed to having that kind of disruption. And what happened, and because the staff were physically separated from the man, they weren't there to engage with him, to maybe redirect him. And what ended up happening was that staff went and helped him to the back and eventually left the building, which hurt my heart. Because this was the funeral of this man's housemate with whom he'd lived for several years. And it was not a place in which he was welcome or able to be himself.
Thank you so much for that, Cindy. I think part of what we're discussing here, I'm just thinking about my experience so far in this conversation. And the first thing that I'm noticing about my own body and my own presence is that I'm not used to bodies of difference. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'm not used to experiencing many diversity bodies of difference in a space, right? And so that's an adjustment that we have to make, and we have to start asking the question, why is that? How have we been how have we been formed spiritually and otherwise in space, particularly in Christian space, where if bodies are different, not just color, not just sexuality, right? But if bodies are differently able, that it throws us off. I mean, I think that's a powerful story, but I think I'm just being honest about what my body has been through today. And that we have to be honest so that we can begin to notice how we've been formed, so we can change and move forward. And I think confess and repent is probably in there too. So I just started by talking about something I wanted to talk about for a minute, but I want to invite you all. I want to invite you all to say, I didn't script this section. There's going to be, you have a perspective, you have some questions, you have some thoughts that may not be that may be coming up today. And so I want to invite you each to just share a moment of something that you think the community needs to hear and to consider. So I want to invite Becca first, and then we can just flow from there.
Absolutely. So I think what I felt called to bring into this space in this moment is just a reminder both to the temporarily abled folks in the room and in the space, and especially to the disabled folks in the room. Disabled folks have so much to offer to the church. There's a term that the activist and poet Leah Lakshmi Pipshna Samarasinha uses called crip knowledge and crip skill. Crip in this case being used as a reclaimed language term for disability. And what that means is that our embodied experiences, our experiences of living in our body minds, teach us things that non-disabled people either do not know or never need to know, frequently can learn, but may not come across in the same ways. So an example of this is I have frequently been told that my public speaking is very strong, in part because I can read my notes or a manuscript in Braille and still maintain eye contact with my audience. And that is something that a sighted person using written notes cannot do. Other things that are maybe less tangible is things like we learn how to rely on each other in community in a way that non-disabled people frequently don't have to and often have a really hard time doing. Like, there are things that I can ask fellow disabled community members to do for me or to do with me that I might feel awkward asking a non-disabled person to do with me, because that would be, it might be something that a non-disabled community expects that you do on your own. And even though that person would be happy to help me, it would still just feel kind of weird. And there's a real beauty and a real gift in being able to rely on one another in ways that society is not always supportive of. So this is mostly an affirmation to all of us who identify as disabled in this space. Frequently, the church will tell us that we don't have something to offer, that society will tell us over and over again that we don't have things to offer, that what we have is needs to be filled, and we should sit back and let people fill those needs. And that is not true. We have needs and we have gifts, and we get to choose how we offer those and how we show up with them. And that as also a reminder to non-disabled folks that there are things that we know and things that we do that you will not know what they are until you take the time to sit down and have a conversation and figure it out.
Reverend Yule, I want to privilege your voice here. Unmute, Reverend Yule.
Sorry. So in talking about this conversation about ableism, it seems to me that something that we should lift up is this whole ideal of a theology of liberation. Just as other minority groups have done with Black theology and womanist theology and queer theology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This ideal, and Professor Sporio talked about it a little bit earlier when she raised the writings of Nancy Eastland, who is a very dear to my heart, the work that she has done, because I saw myself in her work. And so in that, it seems to me that for those of us who are coming from other backgrounds and other I guess races or whatever it may be, this whole ideal of intersectionality is very important. And so I draw myself and a lot of my contemporaries, we draw on the work of Nancy Eastland and Dr. Cone, James Cone, and Dr. Cornel West, and Kathy Black, and Debbie Creamer, and Don Sailors, who along with President Krause and Dr. Niles and Dr. Grundy have all continued to invite me to be a part of that conversation on theology, a liberating theology of disability. And I approach it from Black theology in an effort to create or to form a liberating theology of disability. That's my entrance into that conversation. And as someone who has worked for years as a disability rights advocate. And so I wanted to bring that to the table as well. Again, this whole conversation, we're talking about anti-ableism or ableism, should be addressed with a theology that is liberating, that empowers people to be able to have this dialogue and to know that they have worth and to know that they are children of God and that they have the ability to be able to inform and to influence others because of who they are and what they have been blessed with. And so again, this ideal of liberation is something I wanted to bring to the table.
Thank you. Reverend Sidney?
I'm really intrigued by the idea of communities of difference and what that means for worshiping communities. I look forward to reading Dr. Spurrier's book because I have experience with folks that do things differently. So this past Sunday after worship, I asked the folks who were online, I said, I'm going to be speaking here and we're going to be talking about local congregations. What is your experience in worshiping in local congregations and what do you want people to know? Several people talked about physical barriers, no quality space for somebody using a wheelchair or a walker, no way to get up staircases and steps just right away, doors that don't open or very hard to push open right away, a barrier to getting in at all. But there's other issues. There's the inclusion issues. Are people welcomed and spoken to and in a way that's invitational? Are people invited to participate? Folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, are they invited to read scripture if they are able to read? Are they invited to be part of the leadership of the worship service? They talked about the issues of touch, which can be loaded issues. If people sometimes are touched without their consent, often actually are touched without their consent. And yet there are people that are also ignored and not touched at all, or not ask if they would like a hug. So issues of touch being both a problem and being something that people want to be invited in, people want to be asked if they can be hugged, if they can be touched. Issues of congregational tradition. How comfortable is a congregation? I noticed very much in this morning's worship service the invitation to move. If that's what you feel like your body does. That's what Emmaus folks do. They will move if they need the body to move, if they need to use the restroom, if they need to stand. They will vocalize, they will speak when they wish to do so. How comfortable is your liturgical tradition in people doing that? And is that considered disruptive, or is that considered a different way of interacting with the worship service? I'm going to have a confession here. It took me way too long to realize we serve communion first Sunday of every month. It took me way too long to realize that some folks were not communing because they could not receive the elements. And by that, I meant they weren't able to swallow. They had difficulties with swallowing. And the elements, and we've talked, about gluten allergies and become more aware of that. The elements for some folks needed to actually be pureed, the bread, and the juice needed to be thickened. And I'm ashamed that it took me as long as it did to realize that some folks weren't communing simply because the elements were not accessible to them. That's a theological issue, actually. And some places may have issue with the elements and working with them in that kind of a way. But I think that's something that needs discussion. What if folks really cannot take the elements as you serve them? And then just the issues of all the words we use in worship. And we are wordy folks, and I think we assume a lot of folks can read. And I know that many of my congregation do not read. They can repeat, and they can do call and response kind of things, but they are not going to be able to read instructions, etc. Are we assuming that of people as they worship?
So good. What I'm thinking about is just when you said, if they can read, I was just thinking about that. Like, part of what I hear you're calling us to is an interrogation of all of our practices and the gift that interrogation might bring to a creativity of worship that we have yet explored. Like, what else might there be if we don't require that scripture be read? Like, maybe there's another way we can do that we have yet to imagine, if we would consider that we don't have to read it. So I'm just as you're talking, I'm just thinking about the interrogation of all of our practices of worship, and the gift that might be waiting there for us, if we consider being creative and doing it a different way, not just for those who are differently abled, but for the community as a whole. And so thank you so much for sharing and lifting those voices. Yes, come on in. Yeah, come back.
I'm trying to raise my hand, but
come back in. Yeah, come back in. Yeah, great.
But these issues are broad issues of accessibility, which are about accessibility of us as the body of Christ. So issues of noise and movement and disruption, those are also issues with including children in worship. Issues of physical accessibility, use of wheelchairs, walkers as people age, that becomes an issue. As people have dementia, that becomes an issue. So that we're not talking about these so much as a body of Christ. I think we're not looking at the realities of who we need to be and who we really are as the body of Christ.
Amen. And so we're gonna we're kind of at the end of our conversation. I have no idea what time it is. It just feels like that went really fast. But this is the invitation to help us. And now I'm even thinking about my word work, Becca. Thank you, Becca, for that analysis. But when I say work, I mean the attention to the struggle, and to the movement. And so to bring our attention to how do we enter in, where do we enter in, with whom do we enter in, as we strive to be in the movement, in the struggle for liberation, help us to find those spaces and connect us to what's already afoot. And so I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Reverend Newell, you want to start with helping us get there?
Surely. So if we can just go by, I guess I thought about a list of different entities that are out in the community that we can definitely tap into, who are doing this work already. And we've already talked about the United Methodist Church, the UCC Disability Ministries, definitely. Centers for Independent Living, which are located in probably every community. They have been doing this work for years. They were on the ground of helping to pass the Americans with Disabilities Act, and so they are a great resource. The United Methodist Association of Ministers with Disabilities, the United Methodist Disabilities Ministries, which is something that's different. EDAN, which is not talked about a lot. It is the Ecumenical Disability Advocacy Network, which is a committee of the Worldwide Council of Churches. And so those are some entities that I would just like to raise that we might want to have conversations with, to form relationships with, and to begin to do further work on this ideal of anti-ableism.
Thank you, so helpful. Becca, you want to help us get there?
Absolutely. So I'm going to offer some resources because I like books and podcasts. So I'm going to share some books and podcasts. First, for one thing, we can't say it enough. I'm going to lift up again The Disabled God by Nancy Easland. Seriously, really, if you haven't read this book, please go read this book. It's such an important book if we're talking about ableism. There's so much exploration of how ableism shows up in the church. If we want to talk about liberation theology, which, yes, thank you, Reverend Russell, we absolutely need to be, that it's, as old as I am, and it's still extremely relevant today. Another really great resource, I mentioned previously the work of Leah Lakshmi Peepshna Samarasinha, and so I want to lift up their book, Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice. Leah does not work within church or ministry, but I think it is equally important that we be looking towards secular activists and artists to learn more about disability justice in the disability community. And Leah's book in particular really talks a lot about the disability community and talks a lot about intersectionality. She writes from the perspective of a queer disabled femme of color, and writes a lot about the work at that intersection of identities. And then the last thing is a podcast called Autistic Liberation Theology. It is a podcast by Laura Sommer, who is a queer autistic theology nerd, does not have formal theological education, and brings on people who do have theological education to talk through her theological ideas and give her some perspective on whether they're groundbreaking, old news, or heresy. And I think this is particularly important because one of the things that we say a lot in the disability community is that you don't need to have education in order to know things. You don't need to have a formal degree in order to have embodied knowledge. And I think that Laura's podcast really shows that. And then just quickly, in terms of things that communities can start doing now, Dr. Spurrier mentioned earlier accessibility audits. There are several good ones out there, and I would highly recommend starting a conversation with your church or other community audit and start thinking about physically, programmatically, socially, where is your community in terms of accessibility and practicing anti-ableism?
Thank you, Becca. Reverend Cindy, I wanted to see if you had any research.
Well, I trusted that my colleagues on this panel would have resources, and they did. So I didn't actually concentrate on that, but I did concentrate on the part of the question, what can you do in the next 24 hours? And I think what people can do in the next 24 hours is their own self-criticism or critical examination of your context, your own worship community. What are you assuming has to go on for people to worship there? Who may you be leaving out because of those assumptions? And I think that work can start immediately.
Can we give our panelists a hand? Thank you so much, Becca, Reverend Baum, and Reverend Ewell for this time. We are going to take a break. It's a good idea. Let's take a break. We're going to come back at 2:30, and then we're just going to have some time to digest today. Some time, and we can end early if we're finished talking, but we just want to create some space to digest. So we'll see you in about 10 minutes. I'll introduce you. Yeah. Welcome back. Welcome back to our last conversation and space. We're going to have time to digest and process all we have learned and heard today. I'm going to invite Dr. Spurrier and Reverend Kyle to come back and help us process all that we've learned today. So let's give them a hand and welcome them back.
Thank you, Dr. Weisbaker. We realize it has been a day of many words, and we're really grateful for what we learned from the panel, and wanted to mostly focus on an opportunity for conversation with the panel rather than us saying more things. But I think Kyle was going to open with a few comments of responses that he had, and then we were going to open it up for general questions. Maybe giving you a minute. I was going to have you have a minute to talk to a partner or in the chat, but we're smaller in numbers, so maybe we'll just open it up for a general conversation then. So yeah, Kyle.
Yeah, so I learned a lot as well in this discussion from the panel. I just thought of something that's for too. Another thing.
Do you want to be closer to the mic?
Yeah. Another thing. Two things. One, how even within the disability community, there are abilities and disabilities, and that you may have a disability in one area, one aspect of disability, and be temporarily able in another, and that comes with a sort of privilege, even while you identify with a disability. So what that means for coalition building and intersectionality is important to know. Reverend Russell brought up something about so often, and I would like him to respond to this. The experience of having a disability and being told that your behavior is wrong, or even being separated out and sort of what I've read about as students, a lot of Black folks in particular are taken out of classes and segregated out as a gateway to incarceration. So without accommodating the disability that's present, and so the response is one of two things. Is either ignoring a disability that might be present, or shaming the services because of how they've been used to get to a large amount of Black folks from the school prison pipeline without really interrogating what are the services that particularly Black children in school systems with disabilities need to succeed. So yeah, that was interesting.
I'll say one thing I've been thinking about through the panel discussion, and then we'll just open it up for questions. So I was thinking about the call in the worship, and in my lecture, the call to work, and Becca's also challenge. And it's something I actually think a lot about in my work and writing, but that challenge to capitalism, the ways that we reify work, and the kind of white savior complexes that occur through particular forms of capitalism, and the ways they can be really insidious and just sort of occur again and again in different kinds of ways and different formats, even when we think that we're doing better, deeper work. So I'm thinking, I'd love, I don't know if Becca wants to comment more on that, and I do want to open it up for questions, but just thinking about that way of both calling us to work, but also not reifying particular kinds of work and stretching our theological imagination around the way that we use that word. Do we need another word? Should we use another word instead? Sometimes I'm thinking about our vocabulary, so I think that's a particularly rich form. For me, that's a rich way of sort of thinking, area for us to talk about and think about. But let's open, we've had a lot of time to talk, so let's open it up for both. I think there may be questions already on Zoom that people were asking. I'm not sure, the question and answer, so we could maybe start there and then move to other questions.
Sure. There is a question in the chat for the panel. It's not to anyone in particular. The question is, are search committees of various denominations receiving education about ableism in the search and call process?
No.
Yeah, I'll echo what is being said in person. In my experience from a UCC context, no. And the other thing that I will add is committees on ministry, which are the ordaining bodies within the UCC, also frequently are not being given education on anti-ableism. So in terms of disabled people in ministry, you have both the problems of getting ordained and the problems of finding a call. So that's definitely an area of growth for our denominations. At least within the UCC, I know that. I would be interested to hear about other denominations.
Well, for the United Methodist Church, I know that we are having that same conversation at this moment. It is very difficult still for people with disabilities to be ordained. There's a struggle for folks to be seen and their gifts to be seen. I am one of those people who understand that I was blackballed at a time because they did not know how a blind person might be able to lead a congregation. And so we have to think of, unfortunately, those with disabilities, we've had to think of ways in which to demonstrate our abilities to the judicatories, which I talked about earlier, and how we are effective in ministry because of this embedded ableist thought that runs rampant in our denomination. So.
Are there other
There is a
questions?
question. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
There is a question in the chat specifically for Reverend Kyle. The question is, how difficult were the barriers to accessibility in your journey through your master's program?
To the master's program. So well, so this I never told this story. It got better. It got better the spring of my first year. And part of it was also intersects with some serious vocational discernment. I went to camp. I knew I wanted to be a scholar and a preacher. And so when I went to seminary, my first thought was that I was going to focus on Bible and this study to be a New Testament scholar. I took a language and quickly discerned that that was not what the Lord had called me to do. And partly because the combination of and it's still not out of the question. This was not in the time to figure out within that sort of a time frame. Was how do I learn Hebrew, study Hebrew without, or Greek without writing the characters? And that's something I tend to figure out now that I had time to figure out. But yeah, but other than that, you know, it was smooth. It was really smooth.
Okay, thank you. So I've been thinking about, and this happened during the time of COVID, made it more apparent. But I think it happens all the time. In that, when we live in a world that we feel like we live in a limited, I'm going to use the metaphor of a pizza, you know, that we have to operate within that framework, so that we're limited resources, limited time, limited patience. We don't want to overburden people. And I'm mindful that kind of liberative practices have to do with coalition building. So I'm wondering if you have some examples where the coalition building has been helpful within the church, within the academy.
I'm going to invite our panel to speak first. Any of the panelists who want to speak to that question around coalition building, we can join in.
Yeah, I mean, I will say I think the only way that I've ever known this work to be done is in groups, is to spread the work out among many people. So I co-led a student group at Union called the Disability Justice Caucus, and that was a group of students noting accessibility issues within our school campus and within academic practices, and through dialogue with activists and scholars outside of the seminary, and through professors and administrators within the seminary. We did a lot of work to raise issues of accessibility and begin to address them. A lot of that work is still undergoing. And similarly, when you know, I mean, it's kind of the first response within a church is to form a committee about something, right? But that's frequently what does in fact need to be done is you know, identify who are the people within a community who have knowledge of disability issues and who have resources to give to this work. And I think I will also say to you know, kind of address the point about like limited time and resources and all of that. Like I think those issues are very real, and also they can sometimes seem more real than they are. You know, as a disabled person and working within disability communities, disabled people frequently do not have the same amount of time and resources that non-disabled people do. So we are constantly working to find other ways of doing things and to find other people to be resources with us. And so it can sometimes seem to us that non-disabled people stop right at the point when some creative thought and energy could have solved the problem. So I think that's something to consider is that when you feel at your wit's end with the time and resources, take a moment, pause, acknowledge that that's where you are, and then think about who you might be able to be in conversation with about that.
Can I add to just continue the thought that Becca was sharing about resources and time, particularly for people with disabilities. One of the concerns that some of my colleagues have is people with disabilities and ability to be able to matriculate through academia to sit at certain tables, to be at the table, to earn postgraduate degrees, but also to go on and to earn PhDs and DMins. It's been very difficult for people to be able to rise to that level because of the academic rigors and things being made, understanding accommodations and how time may be different and economics may be different for a person with a disability. So we find that there are not a lot of disabled writers in this area of theology and disability. And I want to take this moment to give a shout out to Rebecca, Dr. Sporer, because I am so excited about your theological construct, the ways in which you are thinking about theology and disability. I say that because some in the disability community have been really frustrated about people writing about us and us not being included and at the tables, and the ways in which we are being written about is not helpful at all. And so I really appreciate, and I can't even tell you how much, I really appreciate the work that you are doing. And I am going to recommend your work to others who are struggling right now to find their voice and to see themselves fully in some of the writings in academia.
Thank you for that. I've had really important teachers along the way, and I continue to learn, even thinking about, Becca, some of your comments about the lecture. So I continue to learn and think more about that. One of the coalitions that's been important to me is the Disability and Religion group at the American Academy of Religion. So for those of us who are in academics, going to spaces that are hybrid academic and hybrid activist, and that are also include people from different backgrounds and different faith traditions. So that's a place where I continue to learn and grow by being a part of that group. So for those of us who are part of academies, those are some places to do coalition building, I think, across that. I'm also just thinking about the, after having done a monograph where I was researching, within a community, alongside a community, but I came away from that thinking I need different ways of thinking about the research questions I have alongside other people. And so now working with a larger group of people who meet regularly, people with and without disabilities who are talking about these questions together. It's been and it's to attend to your question about limited resources. It's been a place, at least you can say, I don't know how it's been for you, Kyle, but it's been a place where maybe I think 50% of our time is spent checking in on each other and sort of seeing how people are doing, so that we're trying to not only ask for work, but also provide mutual care to each other and support each other around other issues other than the research and writing and work we're doing, and then also try to do the work together through shared Google Doc and asking people, what gifts do you actually want to give to this project and what do you not want to be involved with? Being really clear, going back to sort of what Becca said about asking people what gifts they have and what they want to share, and being respectful of that. So that's one of the ways I've been thinking about coalitional research, not just coalitional groups, but coalitional research and writing.
Yes, that's a further, I don't know if you remember, we met at that meeting at AR. Back in, I think it was like 2015. So, with regard to coalition building, Becca said too, reading secular research also should help. And also, Dr. Sawyer work is good. There's a guy I know in New York, a union grad, the Reverend Camp, who is working on the theology of black theology of disability, because what I'm finding is that the disability studies and then the disability theology is very white, and so that's important. So I'm grateful for Reverend Russell and his work in this space as well.
Are there other questions for the panel or for us? Or is there a time, or is it time also to rest here? Yeah, thank you.
There we go. So my question is, you talked a little bit about liberation theology for disability. Do any of you know of like any resources related to liberation theology of disability, particularly as it relates to neurodivergence, things like autism and ADHD, things of that nature?
Again, I'm going to invite the panel first to answer, and then if we can provide additional resources.
Your book?
Yeah, my book would be one resource. Thank you, Kyle.
I'll lift up, I mentioned it earlier, but the podcast Autistic Liberation Theology is doing exactly that. Again, Laura Sommer is not theologically trained, but she has a lot of really great theological ideas about autism and liberation theology, and those conversations are really incredible. I also know that there's work in development related to other neurodivergent and disability theologies. I don't know that any of it has been published yet, but if I come across it, I will be sharing it far and wide. So.
And this is not a sort of theology of liberation in regards to neurodivergence, but an author I find helpful is Margaret Price. She wrote a book, Mad at School, and has some other articles. So she's not coming from a theological lens, but I think her work is helpful, and I've appreciated what I've learned from her. I also think, so another resource I would recommend is the Disability Visibility Project online, where there are a lot of people with different experiences of disability writing about those experiences. So that's another resource that I would recommend, first-person experiences. Again, not necessarily theologically focused, but I think provide tools for thinking about liberative approaches to lots of different experiences of disability.
Yeah, really, I think that sort of the disabled church and focusing on that church is a great resource for that person.
I would also lift up Debbie Kramer's work. And she's actually spoken at Eden some years ago. It was actually her work that began to make me think about a liberation theology of disability. And so I would definitely lift up Debbie Kramer and her work as well.